Step aside. Now, we've got the light for maybe 90 seconds and you're in my frame." I had my phone up, filming the changing of the watch, when those words cut across the forecourt, flat, certain. The voice of a man who had never in his life heard the word no and meant it. I am a schoolteacher from a small town, a long way from any palace, and I had come to the king's gate that morning, the way 10,000 others had. To see the guard who does not move, and to take a photo my students wouldn't believe. I want to tell you exactly what I saw because the clip I shot has been watched more times than I can count, and most people only saw the last 40 seconds of it. I was there for all of it. I saw how it started. I saw the man it ended. The man giving the order was famous. I knew his face before I knew anything else about him. Everyone did. He had a way of arriving that made a space feel like it belonged to him. A long pale coat that probably cost more than my car. Sunglasses he didn't take off even in the gray morning light. And a smile that was switched on like a lamp the second a lens turned his way. Behind him came the machine that travels with that kind of fame. A manager talking into a phone. A stylist with a garment bag over one arm. Two big men in black whose whole job seemed to be making other people smaller, and a young woman with a clipboard who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. They moved the way a flood moves. They did not ask. They flowed into a space and expected it to make room. And in the middle of all of it, at his post in the sentry box beside the tall gilded gate, stood the guard. I've been watching him for 20 minutes already, the way you watch a held breath. Red wool tunic so clean it looked painted on, brass buttons in 2 perfect columns, the tall black bearskin throwing his face into shadow under its weight, white gloves, a rifle held against his shoulder with the kind of stillness you only get from a man who has practiced being a statue until the statue is real. He did not look at the famous man. He did not look at the cameras. His eyes were forward, fixed on something past all of us, some point on the far side of the square that only he could see. He was perhaps 30. There was a thin, pale line of an old scar at his jaw that I would only notice later, when the footage was slowed down and studied frame by people who wanted to know who he was. In that moment, he was simply the wall the flood had run into. "He doesn't hear you," the manager said, not looking up from his phone. "They don't react, it's a whole thing." Then move him. The famous man, I'll call him what the crowd started calling him by the end of that hour, the star, because he would have hated to be called anything smaller, pulled his sunglasses down his nose and looked at the guard for the first time, the way you'd look at a chair that had been left in the wrong place. I'm not standing next to a tourist barricade. I want him out of the shot or I want him doing something. Salute whatever it is they do. We can use that. Get me a salute. He said it to the air. He said it the way you'd order coffee. And then, because the guard did not answer and did not move, because the stillness that the rest of us found magnificent he found insulting, the star did the thing that turned a rude morning into the story I am telling you now. He stepped in, put the flat of his hand against the guard's chest, against those clean brass buttons, that red wool, and he shoved. I heard the crowd around me make a sound. Not a gasp exactly, a kind of intake, 200 people pulling in the same breath at the same instant. The star wasn't a small man, and he put his shoulder into it, the contemptuous push you give a door that's stuck. I genuinely thought the guard would go down. He didn't. He rocked back maybe an inch, the soles of his boots scraping the worn stone, and then he was exactly where he had been, upright, rifle steady, eyes forward, as though the hand against his chest were no more than the wind. He had not looked at the star. Even then, he had not looked at him. "There," the star said and laughed, turning to his stylist. "He moves. Get the camera over here. Put me right beside him. I want the line of the gate behind us and somebody get him to do the rifle thing, the spin, he snapped his fingers twice. You know the thing." I had my phone up the whole time. I want to be honest about that because I've thought about it a lot since. I was filming a man being shoved and I did not step forward and I did not say anything, and neither did anyone else in that crowd of 200. We filmed. That is what we do now. We hold up our little glass rectangles and we let the moment happen so we can have it later. I'm not proud of it, but I'll also tell you this. Every one of those phones became a witness that day, and witnesses, it turns out, were exactly what the morning needed. The guard still had not moved. And that, I understand this now in a way I didn't then, that was not weakness. That was the first move in something the star could not see coming, because the star had spent his whole life in rooms where the most important thing was him. He had never stood at a gate like this one. He didn't know the rule the rest of us were only beginning to feel in our stomachs. There is a man at the gate who is allowed to do nothing. And there are, behind him, a great many men whose entire purpose is to make sure that nothing is the only thing he ever has to do. Hey, the star leaned in close to the guard's face now, close enough that I could see his breath fog faintly in the cold. I'm talking to you. You know who I am. The guard's eyes did not move, but I was near enough I drifted closer without meaning to, the way you drift toward a fire, that I saw the only thing that did move. His jaw. A small muscle there, tightening once and releasing, the way a man swallows something he has decided not to say. It was the most human thing I had seen all morning, and it lasted less than a second, and then it was gone and he was stone again. The manager finally lowered his phone. He had been in this business a long time, you could tell, and somewhere under all that distraction an older, more careful instinct had woken up. He looked at the guard. He looked at the gate. He looked at the small camera, mounted high on the stone above the sentry box, that had turned slowly, deliberately, with a soft mechanical whir none of us heard but all of us would learn about, to point directly down at the star's bright, certain, upturned face. Maybe, the manager said quietly, we do this somewhere else. The star wasn't listening. The star never listened. He had his shot in his head already. He reached out, and this time he didn't shove. This time he took hold of the barrel of the guard's rifle, to move it, to pose it, to make the statue do the rifle thing. And that was the moment the morning stopped being about a rude man, and started being about everything that stands behind a quiet one. The guard moved. I don't want to oversell it, because if you've seen the clip you know it wasn't dramatic, and that's the whole point. There was no shout, no struggle, no scuffle for the crowd to scream about. The guard simply brought the rifle up and around in one short, drilled motion, a quarter turn that broke the star's grip cleanly off the barrel and set the weapon back against his own shoulder, exactly where it had been. It took less than a second. It was the most controlled thing I have ever watched a human body do. He did not raise the rifle toward the star. He did not need to. The message was in the economy of it. I will let you push me, because the rules say I must stand here and take that. I will not let you put your hands on this. The rifle is not yours to pose. And his eyes still hadn't moved. The star stumbled back a half step, more from surprise than force, and for one bright instant his famous face did something I'd bet money it had not done in years. It went uncertain, just for a flicker. Then the lamp switched back on, and the uncertainty curdled into the thing that always comes next for men like him, which is anger that anyone had made him feel small in front of a crowd. Did you see that? He spun to his entourage and his voice climbed. He put a weapon on me, you all saw it. He swung a rifle at me. None of which was true, and every phone in that square had the proof, but truth had never been the currency the star traded in. Get his name, get his number, his badge, whatever they have. I want him gone by tonight. I want him. He jabbed a finger an inch from the guard's shadowed face. You are finished. Do you understand me? One phone call. I make one phone call and a man like you doesn't have a job, doesn't have a pension, doesn't have anything. That's what I am. That's what you just did to yourself. The two big men in black moved up on either side of the star now, squaring toward the guard, and the mood in the crowd shifted from fascination to something tighter. The young woman with the clipboard had gone very pale. The manager was saying the star's name, low and urgent, the way you'd say it to a man standing too near the edge of a roof. The guard did not answer the threat. Of course he didn't. But I was close, and I will tell you what I saw because it has stayed with me longer than anything else. When the star said one phone call, the guard's gaze fixed, forward, unbroken for the better part of an hour, shifted. Not far, not to the star. It rose just slightly past the famous shouting face, to the high stone wall above the gate, where that small camera sat with its dark lens trained down on all of us. And then his eyes came back to center, forward still, as if he had checked something, as if he had confirmed a thing he already knew. I didn't understand it then. I understand it completely now. He wasn't afraid of the phone call. He was the phone call. He had already been made. Behind the gilded gate, past the wide gravel sweep of the forecourt, the palace stood the way it always stands in the photographs, serene and enormous and seemingly empty, 100 dark windows giving nothing away. From where I stood, I could see no movement in any of them. But that is the thing about a place built to protect something. Its stillness is not emptiness. Its stillness is the surface of very deep water. Somewhere behind one of those dark windows, I would learn. A duty officer had watched the whole thing on a screen, had watched the shove and the grab and the finger in his sentry's face, and had picked up a handset, and had said, in the even unhurried voice of a man for whom this was simply the day's work, a short sentence that set a great many disciplined people quietly into motion. The star didn't hear it. The star was still performing. He had decided the guard's silence was a kind of cowardice, and he was feeding on it, growing, the way that kind of man always grows in the absence of resistance. "Set up here," he told the stylist, flinging an arm at the gate. "We're shooting right here. I want him in the background, standing there like the wax dummy he is, and when this goes up I want everyone to see I can stand wherever I want, in front of whoever I want, and there's nothing this little tin soldier can do about it." He turned back to the guard one more time and he smiled, and he reached up and flicked the brim of that tall bearskin with 2 fingers, a small contemptuous tap, the kind of thing a boy does to another boy he's decided is too afraid to hit him back. "Smile for the camera, soldier. You're going to be famous. You're going to be in my shot." The guard did not move, not for the flick, not for the tin soldier, not for any of it. But I saw a tourist near the gate, an older man, ramrod straight, the kind of bearing you don't get from an office, lower his phone and say, to no one in a voice that carried, "Son, you have no idea what you're standing in front of." The stylist had the garment bag open. The young woman with the clipboard was trying to get the manager's attention, and the manager was no longer looking at any of them. He was looking past the gate, into the forecourt, where the gravel ran up to the great doors of the palace, and his face had changed completely. Because the doors had opened. Not thrown wide, not dramatic. They had simply parted the way a serious door parts, and through them, unhurried in step, came men. Not a charge, not a rush. A walk, that even, measured, unbreakable walk that I have only ever seen from soldiers, and that does something to your stomach precisely because it is so calm. There were 6 of them at first that I could count, in a darker uniform than the sentries, and they did not run and they did not shout, and that was the most frightening thing of all. They came across that wide gravel forecourt toward the gate at the pace of men who knew, with absolute certainty, that the gate was not going anywhere, and that the man behind it would still be exactly where he was when they arrived. "Okay," the manager said, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. "Okay, we need to leave. We need to leave right now." "We're not leaving," the star snapped. "We just got the—" He stopped, because he had finally turned and followed the manager's stare, and he had finally seen them coming. And for the first time that morning, the famous, certain, switched-on face went dark and slack and ordinary, the face of any man anywhere, who has just understood that the rules he has lived by his whole life do not run on this particular patch of ground. Beyond the men crossing the gravel, more movement now. At the far corners of the square, where there had been only ordinary morning, dark vehicles were sliding into place, quiet as cats. And the sentry, my sentry, the man at the gate who had not spoken one word and had not thrown one punch, and had not so much as turned his head, stood at the center of all of it. The still point, the reason, eyes forward, rifle steady, while the whole disciplined weight of the place he guarded came down around the man who had put his hands on him. The 6 men reached the gate. I expected it to swing open with a clang, for them to pour through and seize the star, for there to be shouting and shoving and a scene the crowd could feed on. There was none of that. The lead man, older, gray at the temples, 3 small bars on his shoulder that meant nothing to me but clearly meant everything to him, stopped at the inside of the gate and spoke a single quiet word. And the gate was opened from within by hands I never saw, just wide enough for him and 2 others to step through onto our side. The rest stayed inside, fanning out along the railings, facing outward, hands folded, watching the crowd with the polite, total attention of men who have decided nothing in this square will happen that they do not allow. The gray-haired officer did not look at the star first. That is the detail I keep coming back to. With everything happening, with 200 phones recording, with a famous man waiting to be acknowledged, the first thing the officer did was walk to the sentry, stop in front of him and look at him. A long, careful, head-to-boots look. The look a man gives a fence after a storm to see if it held. Then he said something I couldn't hear, 3 or 4 words, and the sentry's eyes flicked to him for half a second and back to forward, and that was all. But I understood it. The officer had asked him if he was all right. He had checked on his man before he dealt with anything else, and only when that was done, only then, did he turn, unhurried, and face the star. "Sir," the officer said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The crowd had gone so quiet you could hear the flags snapping on the palace roof. "I am the duty officer of the watch. You are going to lower your camera, and you and your party are going to step back from the gate, and we are going to have a short conversation." "Do you know who I am?" the star said. It was the 3rd or 4th time he'd said it, and it had less in it every time, like a coin worn smooth. "I have 40 million people who—" "I know exactly who you are." The officer said it without heat, which somehow made it land harder than a shout. "We identified you the moment your vehicle entered the square. What you appear not to know is who he is." He didn't gesture at the sentry. He didn't need to. "That man holds the king's gate. The post he stands has been held without a single break for longer than your country has had a flag. You laid hands on him. You laid hands on his weapon. You did both in front of a great many cameras, including ours, which means I am not here to discuss whether it happened. I am here to tell you what happens now." The star's manager stepped forward, palms out, the practiced voice of a man who had smoothed over 1,000 bad nights. "Officer, listen, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. We're happy to relocate the shoot, no harm done. We can all just—" There was no misunderstanding. The officer turned his head a few degrees toward the manager, and the manager stopped talking. "And there was harm done. You will both remain here." He raised one gloved hand, a small, unhurried signal, and 2 of the men who had stayed at the railing detached and came forward and took up position behind the 2 big men in black, not touching them, simply standing close, and the 2 big men in black, who had spent the morning making other people smaller, looked suddenly like exactly what they were, which was 2 employees a long way out of their depth. I looked around the square then, really looked, and saw how completely the trap had closed without anyone springing it. The dark vehicles at the corners had men standing beside them now, easy, watchful. The far end of the square, where the star's people had left their own glossy black cars, was quietly blocked by a single official vehicle parked across the lane. No lights, no fuss, just there. There was no way out that had not been thought of before the star ever noticed the doors opening. They had not rushed because they had never needed to rush. The whole thing had the terrible smoothness of a routine because I realized it was one. This was not the first time someone had mistaken the quiet man at the gate for a soft target. It was simply the first time it had been filmed this well. You can't keep me here, the star said, but his voice had thinned. This is a public square. I have rights. I have lawyers. By the time they're done with this place. You are free to call your lawyers, the officer said. I would, in fact, encourage it. While you do, you should know that the assault of a member of the household guard on duty is not a matter your representatives will be settling with a phone call and an apology. It will be reviewed. The footage, yours, ours, and theirs, a small nod at the crowd, at all of us and our glass rectangles, will be reviewed. And the conversation you have been imagining, the one where you make a call and a man loses his job, is going to happen. It is simply going to happen in the other direction. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed. One short, surprised bark quickly swallowed. The star heard it. I watched it land on him. For a man who lived on the approval of strangers, the sound of a stranger laughing at him was, I think, worse than the vehicles, worse than the officer, worse than any of it. He rounded on the sentry then. It was the last card he had, and it was a cheap one. This is your fault, he spat. You couldn't just move. You couldn't just do the one thing, the salute. All you had to do was stand there and let me have my shot, and instead you had to make a thing of it, and now look. Look what you've done to all these people's mourning. I hope you're proud of yourself, soldier. I hope standing there like a statue was worth your whole career. And the sentry, for the first and only time, answered him. He did not turn his head. He did not raise his voice. He kept his eyes forward on that far point past all of us, and he said 6 words, quiet and even, in a voice I had not heard until that moment and have not forgotten since. I never needed it to be. Then he was silent again and stone again, and the words hung in the cold air over all of us. I never needed it to be. He did not mean the career, though that is how it sounded at first. He meant the salute. He meant the shot. He meant the famous man's whole world, the entire economy of being seen, the thing the star had built his life on and could not imagine anyone living without. And the sentry had just told him, in 6 plain words, that he had never wanted any of it. Not the fame, not the frame, not to be in anyone's picture. That he had chosen instead to be the man who stands so that other people can be safe enough to not pay attention. The star had come to that gate to take something, a moment, a backdrop, a little of the guard's stillness to make himself look larger. And the guard had just shown him, without lifting a finger, that there was nothing here to take. You cannot rob a man of a thing he has already given away on purpose. The star had no answer for that. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he had no answer at all. His mouth opened and shut. The lamp behind his face would not switch on. After that it came apart quickly, and it came apart quietly, which I think wounded him more than any uproar could have. The officer turned to the stylist, who was still standing there frozen with the open garment bag over her arm, and said, almost gently, "You can pack that up now." And she did, with shaking hands, the fine clothes that were never going to be worn at that gate folded away into the dark. He turned to the young woman with the clipboard and said, "Is anyone in your party in need of anything? Water, a seat?" And she shook her head and started, absurdly, to cry, out of relief, I think, out of the sheer release of a morning's dread, and one of the dark-uniformed men brought her a folding chair from somewhere and set it down for her without a word. They had thought of that too. Of course they had. The 2 big men in black were the first to understand that their careers in intimidation were over for the day. When the officer's men gestured them toward one of the dark vehicles for what he called a brief account of what occurred, they went without a sound, shoulders rounded, the menace gone out of them like air out of a tire. The manager went next, still trying to negotiate, still saying we can make this right, his voice following him across the gravel until a closing door cut it off. And then it was just the star, standing at the gate where he had meant to stand in triumph, in front of 200 people and one immovable man, with no entourage left to make the space belong to him. "My phone," he said suddenly, patting his coat, a man grasping at the last instrument of his power. "Where's I'm calling my." "Your devices will be returned to you," the officer said, Once the footage on them has been preserved, you filmed an assault. You filmed yourself committing it. Under the circumstances, I'd advise you not to delete anything. He let that settle. You may keep your sunglasses. The star took his sunglasses off. I don't know why that was the moment. Out of everything, the shove, the rifle, the doors, the vehicles, the 6 words, it was the star taking off his own sunglasses slowly with both hands and standing there blinking in the gray morning light with his famous face fully exposed and nothing behind it. That made the crowd finally let out the breath it had been holding for an hour. Without the glasses, he was just a man. A tired, frightened, ordinary man who had pushed the wrong stranger on the wrong morning, and the magic that had made everyone in his life say yes was simply gone, evaporated, leaving him standing in a square full of people who were no longer afraid of him at all. They walked him to a vehicle. Not roughly, I want to be clear about that, because the discipline of it was the whole point, and the gentleness was a kind of contempt sharper than any rough handling could have been. 2 men, one at each shoulder, not gripping, just guiding, the same measured pace they had crossed the gravel with. The star didn't fight. There was nothing left to fight with. He looked back once at the gate, at the sentry, and I saw him search that shadowed face for something, an apology, a flinch, a flicker of triumph, anything that would have made the guard a person he could be angry at. He found nothing. The sentry's eyes were forward on that far point, on the horizon past all of us. The star had already left the guards whirled the way a stone leaves the surface of deep water. A small disturbance, a ring or two, and then the surface closed over and was still, as if he had never been there at all. The door of the vehicle shut, and the man whose name had been on 40 million screens that morning was driven, quietly, out of the square he had walked into as though he owned it, and the gate did not so much as turn its head to watch him go. For a moment the square just stood there, all of us not sure what we were allowed to do. Then the officer turned to the crowd and raised his voice for the first time, just enough to carry. "Thank you," he said. "You may continue to film. You witnessed something today. There is no harm in others seeing it." And then more quietly, with the smallest dip of his head toward all of us, "Mind the rope, please. The watch continues." The watch continues. He said it the way you'd say the sun will rise. And it was true, because while everything else had happened, while the famous man's whole machine had been dismantled piece by quiet piece, the one thing that had not changed, not for a single second of any of it, was the sentry at the gate. He had been still at the start, and he was still now. The storm had broken over him and rolled away, and he was exactly, precisely, immovably where he had always been, eyes forward, rifle steady, the brass on his tunic catching the first weak break of sun through the cloud. And I understood, watching him, that this was the thing the star had never been able to grasp. The sentry had won the entire confrontation without ever entering it. He had simply continued to be what he was, and let the rest of the world arrange itself around that fact. A few minutes later, on the hour, his relief marched out from the forecourt in that clean drilled step, and the changing of the watch happened exactly as it was meant to, as it had that morning before any of this, as it would the next morning and every morning after. The 2 sentries faced, and the rifles came down and went up, and the new man took the post, and the man I had watched all morning, the man who had been shoved and grabbed and threatened and flicked on the brim of his bearskin like a boy in a schoolyard, turned and marched away across the gravel, back through the great doors, without once looking at the crowd that was, by then, applauding him. I drove home that afternoon, and I didn't post the clip right away. I want you to know that. I sat in my kitchen with the footage on my laptop, and I watched it through 4 times before I did anything with it, because I had the strange feeling that it wasn't mine to put out into the world, that I'd be doing the same thing the star had done, taking the guard's stillness and using it to make something for myself. In the end, I posted it because of the 6 words. Because I thought people should hear a man say I never needed it to be, and mean it, in a world that runs on everyone needing to be seen all the time. I posted it with no caption. I didn't add a single word. The footage didn't need me. By the next morning, it had been watched 11 million times. I'm not going to pretend I understood in that first day why it spread the way it did. I thought people would share it for the obvious reason: the famous man humbled, the powerful brought low, the schoolyard satisfaction of watching a bully meet a wall. And some of them did. But that wasn't what filled my messages. What filled my messages, thousands of them from people in countries I'd never been to, was something quieter and harder to name. They wrote to me about the sentry, about the jaw muscle, the one small human flicker, and then the stone coming back down over it. About the way he checked the camera with his eyes and came back to center calm, because he already knew. About the officer checking on his man before he dealt with the famous one. Are you all right before anything else? People wrote to me that they had watched it and cried and didn't fully know why, and I think I do know why now, after all this time sitting with it. They were not watching a man get what he deserved. They were watching a man who could not be moved, surrounded by an entire institution that existed in the end, to make sure he never had to be. And they were realizing, some of them for the first time, how badly they had wanted to believe that such a thing was still real. That somewhere there were people who would close ranks not around the rich and the loud, but around the quiet one who simply held his post. The Star issued a statement 2 days later. I read it. It used the word misunderstanding 4 times and the word apologize once, buried in the middle of a sentence, and it blamed the lighting and the schedule and the pressure of his work and a miscommunication with palace staff. And it did not at any point say the words I pushed a man who was not allowed to push me back. The footage was right there. Everyone had seen it. The statement made things worse, the way those statements always do, because the one thing the crowd had wanted from him was the one thing his whole life had trained him to never give, which was to simply stand still and admit a thing without trying to make it smaller. He could not do it. He had spent so long being managed that he no longer knew how to be a man who says I was wrong and lets the silence after it do the rest. The guard could stand in silence for an hour and turn it into the strongest thing in the square. The Star could not stand in it for 2 seconds. I never learned the sentry's name from any official source, and I've come to think that's exactly as it should be. The palace never released it. The officer never said it. In every interview a reporter tried to get, the answer was some version of the same thing. He is a member of the household guard. He conducted himself entirely correctly. There is nothing further to say. They protected his name the way they had protected his post, by quietly closing around it and refusing to let anyone take it for a story. The one man in that whole spectacle who could have become famous overnight, who could have had the lawyers and the deals and the 40 million screens, was the one man who was never going to be allowed to. And I have no doubt at all that if you could have asked him, he would have told you that was the only part of the whole affair that mattered to him. I went back to the gate once about a year later. I told myself it was for my students, that I wanted a photo for the classroom, but the truth is I wanted to see whether it would feel the way it had. The square was full of tourists again, phones up again, the same as any morning. And there at the post, beside the same gilded gate, stood a sentry. I genuinely could not tell you whether it was the same man. Under the bearskin and the red wool, they are all of them the same disciplined silhouette, which I have decided is the whole idea. Red tunic, brass buttons, white gloves, rifle steady, eyes forward, fixed on some far point past all of us. People posed beside him. People made faces, leaned in, tried to catch his eye. He gave them nothing, and the nothing he gave them was complete and dignified and unbothered, and not one of them, not one, reached out to put a hand on him. Because they had all seen the clip. That was the thing I understood, standing there a year on. 11 million views and then 100 million, and somewhere in all those screens, a lesson had quietly traveled the world and lodged itself in people who would never come within 1,000 miles of that gate. You do not touch the man who holds the post, not because he will hurt you. He won't. That was never the point. But because behind that one still man stands something patient and disciplined and very, very large, and it is always watching, and it does not need to hurry, and it will quietly close around you the moment you mistake his stillness for an invitation. The star had taught the whole world that lesson by being the one who learned it the hard way. In a sense, he finally got his wish. He had wanted the guard to be in his shot, to be the backdrop for his fame. Instead, the guard became the foreground, and the star became the small cautionary figure in the corner of someone else's frame, mine. As it turned out, the man we point to when we tell the story of the morning fame ran up against the gate and discovered the gate did not care. I show the clip to my students now every year at the start of the term. I don't tell them what to take from it. I just play it once, all of it, and let it end on the sentry marching back through those great doors with the applause behind him that he would not turn around to accept. And every year some young person asks me the same question, the one the star could never have answered and the one the guard answered in 6 words without even turning his head. They ask me, why didn't he just move? It would have been so easy. He could have done the salute, taken the shove, let the famous man have his little picture, and none of it would have cost him a thing. And I tell them what I have come to believe is the truest thing I learned that morning, standing in that cold square with my phone up like everybody else, watching a man be still while the world came down around the one who tried to move him. I tell them, because some things are not yours to give away just because someone powerful asks for them, because there is a kind of strength that has nothing to do with hitting back, and a kind of victory you win by simply, completely, refusing to be moved. He held his post. That was all he ever did, and it turned out to be the loudest thing in the world.